As Hashem, today's daf is daf Ayin Aleph, and we will begin on daf Ayin Amid Beis, just opposite the Taisus V'Ramez Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi. Let's just make this bigger. Okay, so we're starting from Ayin Amid Beis in the middle of the page. Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi. We learned yesterday that Rabbi Yochanan said a statement of a man gave instructions to his wife. A comment on the Mishnah. A man gave instructions that he wants to write a get for his wife. And then all of a sudden he turned insane. So Rabbi Yochanan made a comment and said that while he's insane, you cannot write the get to his wife. Only after he becomes sane, he once again returns to being sane, then you can continue on his first instructions and you don't have to re-ask him again. But while he is insane, you can't write the get to his wife. And the reason is, the Gemara explains, is that Rabbi Yochanan holds that when the time that a person's giving a get to his wife, even though he's not personally giving it, a shliach is giving it, a shliach is writing it, a shliach is giving it, the person, the meshaleach, the megarish himself has to be sane. And if he's insane, then the get is invalid. So you have to wait for somebody who turned insane to become back sane again, and then you can follow through with his instructions to write a get to his wife. So the Gemara says like this: Did Rabbi Yochanan say such a thing? Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Shmuel. If someone got stabbed by his food pipe and windpipe, or most of those two main arteries, main pipes in his body, and he's about to die, basically. And the Gemara assumes now that when somebody was mortally wounded, he's insane, basically, at that moment. V'ramaz, and he made a hint. V'aman, he said, Kis v'get lishti, write a get for my wife. Let's say he's going to die in 10 minutes from now. They should write the get and give it to his wife. Why does he want his wife to have a get? Because he doesn't want his wife to fall to his brother for Yibam. And Betanya, we learned in the Brayso, Ru'uhu miguyed, oitzolav, you see somebody cut up or on the stake, oitzolav al atzliva, and he's bounded to a cross. The Mishnah, the Brayso says that clearly, not just the Amoira. Brayso says that if he says that at that time, write a get from a wife, you should write the get and give it to his wife. So we see that during the moments of insanity, because presumably while he's about to die, he's not with his full intelligence, as he's getting closer and closer to death. Yet you can follow through on his previous instructions to write a get and give it to his wife. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say that you always have to wait until he turns back sane in order to give the get for his wife? This Brises seem to indicate not so. So the Gemara says, Hachi hashta, how can you compare? Hasam, over there in the Brisa, daitet solusahi. The man has a clear mind. He just had a weakness starting in his body, and he's getting closer to death, but his mind is sane. Over here, we're talking about daita shegishta. This person went insane. He's totally nuts. And therefore, as long as he's in that state of mind, we cannot follow through and give a get to his wife until he turns back sane. So now the Gemara says the question: how did Shmuel say that you could give a get to his wife? Someone who was mortally wounded, you can follow through on his instructions. Shmuel said before that you can follow through on instructions and you write the get for his wife after he was mortally wounded. How can it be so? There's another statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. If someone again was mortally wounded by his food and windpipe, ubarach, and then somehow he ran into the woods. So we don't know if he's dead or not, and his wife could remarry. Me'idin olav yalada, say testimony that the man is a dead man. But if you're telling me that he's always staying alive, amai me'idin olav, why? And he's alive enough to give a get. Amai me'idin olav. So how could you say testimony that he's dead and that his wife could remarry? So the Gemara says very simply, when somebody's mortally wounded, he's probably alive for another couple of minutes, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, but he's eventually going to die very soon. Amri, the Chachama answered, he's alive, but he's going to eventually die. Says the Gemara, If that's true, somebody who does this to a person, who mortally wounds a person by accident, he should go into the Ari Miklat. He should go into the Ari Miklat because he's considered as if he killed the person. Allah Matanya, why did we learn another brayso? Shachet by shnayim, or roif shnayim, hareza enagoyla. If you shechted the two pipes, or most of them, if somebody did it by accident, hareza enagoyla, he doesn't go to Golas. But why? The man is going to die once this happened to him. You just told me soifei lamas, he's going to die. So therefore, somebody does this by accident to somebody else, he should be responsible enough to be required to go to Ari Miklat. And says the Gemara, Rabbi Shaya, in other words, when do we say that somebody goes into Golas? If, let's say, he fell from a ladder and landed and smashed somebody, and the guy died instantly, right? So then that was an accident. You run to Ari Miklat. Here, since there's a time from the being mortally wounded to the time that the person died, we are concerned maybe the wind he didn't die that in a direct cause of the person that mortally wounded him, but maybe a wind came, bil baltoy, and that's what caused maybe a certain type of air came into the person's body, and that's what hastened the person's death. So it wasn't just a mortal wound, but it was also the atmosphere itself that killed the person, and therefore you don't go to Golas. Iname. Who kira this misase? The man who got mortally wounded actually brought upon his own death, so to speak, by jumping around. So the Gemara feels that if you're not the ultimate direct cause of the death, so you don't go to Golas. If the victim himself was responsible for his own death, so to speak, so then the perpetrator does not go to Golas. My benai, what's the difference between these two reasons of chayshinam shema ruach bebaltoy who kira vis misase? I'll give you a case. The shachta bebases the sheishu pirchas. Let's say he killed him, he mortally wounded him in a house like an operating room, which is made of marble. So there's no outside air, it's sterilized air. So that certainly didn't kill him. Upirches, but the person jumped around. So according to the second reason, you go to Golas. You don't go to Golas, but according to the first reason, because of Ruach, since there is no Ruach that caused it, so therefore, according to the first reason, the person would go to Golas. Iname, in another situation, the Shachte Bara, you shechted him on the outside, but he didn't jump around. So he wasn't the one that caused his death. So according to the second reason, you would go to Golas. According to the first reason, since it's the outside ear that caused the person to die sooner, you would not go to Golas. Okay, those were side points, but here, back into the Mishnah. Mishnah continued, nishtatek. Here, let's say, loyalenu, a person got a stroke, right? So, and he's paralyzed. And so therefore he can't even move his mouth. He can't communicate. And they asked them, do you want us to write a get for your wife? And he shook his head. Yes. So then you test him out to 3 times to see if he answers yes, if he answers yes to different questions or no to different questions. And that proves that the person is sane, and therefore you could follow through on his instructions to write a get for his wife. So the Gemara asks the question of the leichus, let us be concerned. Dilma shichaya de lav nakte, inam shichaya de hein nakte. Perhaps, if you're just going to ask him the same question, which requires a yes answer or a no answer, so the fact that he answers yes doesn't indicate that he's sane. Perhaps he has a spasm that causes him to move his head down, yes, or maybe he has a spasm that says no, no. So how do you know by asking him the question that he is a sane person just because he gives you the right answer? If you're asking them the question that requires the same answer. So first the Gemara says, we don't ask him a question right after each other, but we actually pause the question. In other words, we ask him a question and the answer is yes. So he shakes his head yes. Then we wait 20 minutes and we ask him another question which the answer should be yes, and he shakes and says yes. So the Gemara says that still doesn't prove the person is sane. Maybe, perhaps, the spasm is that every 20 minutes he shakes his head yes, or every 20 minutes he's shaking his head no. So how do you know, how did your questions indicate that the person's sane? And says the Gemara, what we probably thought to yourself, that you mix up the questions. You ask him questions, one question is that the right answer is yes, and then you switch it around, And the next two questions with the right answer is no, or the opposite. You ask him a question where the right answer is no, and then two more questions where the right answer is yes. Utrein lab, or you ask him two questions where the right answer is no, and you ask him one question where the right answer is yes. So that is how you test somebody is sane after he got a paralyzing stroke. The Rabbi Shmuel says, I don't think Rabbi Shmuel has another way. It seems that he's giving you another way to test if somebody is sane. You ask him a question, a basically weather-related question. You ask him a question that's weather-related that would indicate that he's sane during the winter and during the summer. You ask him things that you would not request in the winter. You would only request something like that in the summer. Or summer items you would request only, you ask him things that you request in the winter, only you request in the summer. Summer things you would request in the winter. You ask him, let's say, would you like a winter coat? In it's summer, hot outside, so that's an indication. If he doesn't answer the right answer, it's an indication he's not sane. Or let's say it's wintertime, you ask him, would you like a bathing suit? So obviously, if he answers yes, then he's not sane. So the Gemara says that doesn't prove anything. Sometimes a person in the winter gets very hot, and therefore he wants a summer clothing. And sometimes in the summer, a person's very cold and he wants a winter coat. So that's the Gemara's question. You ask him about a winter coat or about a sheet, like a bathing suit. Maybe let's say, if it's summertime, maybe he's very cold and therefore he wants a winter coat in the summer. Or maybe if it's in the winter time and he's asking for a bathing suit, maybe he feels hot and he wants a pair of shorts. So how do you know that the person is sane? So we go to Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph. You ask him about a certain fruit, which and the time of the Gemara is written, certain fruits did not appear only in the summertime or only in the wintertime. So if you ask him, let's say, about a watermelon, and it's wintertime, watermelon only comes in the summer. So if he says, yes, give me the watermelon, that's a proof that he's not sane. If you ask him about a summer fruit, a winter fruit in the summer, and he answers that he wants it, that also proves he's not sane. Nu Gemara, Rav Kahana, Rav. Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav, and this is a fascinating statement. He said like this, Cherish, somebody who is deaf. What he means, we're going to learn that Rav meant that if a person's both deaf and cannot speak. So normally we would treat that person as a shaita. For whatever reason, we consider that person an imbecile, even though he looks like he functions normally, but the fact is that he cannot hear and cannot speak. So Rav said, although you consider him a shaita, but let's say this cherish is unique. He could write his instructions down on a piece of paper. He taught himself how to write, and he figured out how to write, and so he could speak through writing things down. If you gave instruction to give a get to his wife, we would give the get to his wife. Now, normally, we learned in Masechta Yevamis that let's say a person was normal when he got married, right? So when a person's normal when he got married, he made a kedushin da'iraisa. Then, if he turned into a deaf mute, somehow he lost the function of hearing and speaking while he was married, or he became insane, he can never get rid of his wife because he had a kedushin da'iraisa. A cherish giving a get to his wife is a kedushin da'rabbanan. So therefore he would normally not be able to give a get to his wife. But Rav came up with a chiddush that if the person is a cherish, but he can actually write things down, that's an indication that he's not a cherish shaita v'katan. He's actually considered to be a sane person, and therefore he can give a get to his wife. So even though he got married, he was normal, and then he became a cherish. If he still has the functionality that he could write instructions, clear instructions down on a piece of paper, and he makes sense, then we can follow through on his instructions, and he could give a get to his wife. So the Gemara asks a question, Amar Rav Yosef, what is the novelty of Rav's idea? Tanina, we learned that in a brisa, nishtatek, if a person becomes paralyzed and cannot speak, okay, but he can hear, right? So we tell him, do you want to write a get to your wife? And he shakes and says yes. We check him out 3 times. Im ama lav lav al hein hein. If he says no, no, yes, yes, harei elu yichtu v'v'yitnu, then you could give him. Because so we see that even just nodding your head is good enough for somebody who just can't speak but could hear. So and the way so therefore just like by Elim, we'll call somebody who can't speak just by shaking his head, we understand what he's trying to say. So therefore, that same extent should apply to a cherish. If you ask him in writing, do you want to divorce your wife? And he says yes, that is a proof that he's sane. So even though therefore, this idea of Rav that to test somebody who's normal is you just see if he writes instructions on a piece of paper can be derived from our Mishnah. So what is the novelty of Rav? So the Gemara says the obvious answer. The Mishnah is dealing with a sane person because he actually could hear, but he cannot speak. And therefore, you just have to do a minimal test to see if he's sane. But somebody who loses all his functions of hearing and speaking, maybe he totally went insane. Maybe the fact that he could write instructions, I would think, is not enough to determine that he's sane. So Rav said that is enough. That's what the Gemara says. Amalei Reb Zeir said from our Mishnah, Elin Ka'amret, you want to derive something from someone who can speak, but who can't speak but could hear. Shani Elim, Elim is different because he's considered to be a sane person, generally speaking. We just test to make sure he's sane, but the first assumption that he's sane. Regarding a cherish that cannot speak and cannot hear, the first assumption is that he cannot be considered sane. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, if someone speaks and cannot hear, that's considered a cherish. So here, although you can't, that's not the cherish that Rav is talking about. The Mishnah says that even if someone speaks but cannot hear, he's considered a deaf person. If you can hear and cannot speak, that is an ilim. Those considered, the first assumption is that they are sane people. Rav is, again, talking about a cherish that cannot speak and cannot hear. How do we know if someone speaks and cannot hear, that's considered a cherish? How do you know? The Gemara just asked the side question. How do you know the Hebrew word for somebody who cannot hear is called a cherish, and for somebody who just cannot speak is called an elim? How do you know that's the right Hebrew word? Because there's a pasuk in Tehillim, I'm like a cherish who cannot hear. I'm like an elim who cannot open his mouth. So the word cherish means you cannot hear. The word elim generally means you cannot speak. The Ibai is saying, like people said, ishtakel milule, that his words were taken. So elim means just the opposite, that your milel, your words were like removed from you. So maybe the aleph means ishtakel lame, the words. But the point is like this. Normally, the first default for somebody who can speak but cannot hear, or cannot speak, is that their default is sane. Rav is talking about a situation where a cherish, he has both, like I wrote over here. He cannot speak and cannot hear. So did he go totally insane? Maybe my assumption is totally insane. But comes along Rav, and Rav says that if he's sane enough that he writes instructions down and somehow makes sense, then we can see that this person maintained his sanity. Reb Zeir said, if you have a question, Hokashali. This will be my question against Rav. I have another question against Rav. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Im lo yagid, if someone, the Torah tells us that if someone comes over to you and says, I want you to tell me, I make you swear that you know Adis, and you swear, I don't know Adis, and the truth is that you do know Adis, you have to bring a carbon shvuah. Because if someone calls you to testify and to jury to testify, and you refuse to come, and he makes you, and you swear, I don't know Adis, that's a big avera. And if you swore that you don't know testimony, and it turns out you regretted it and you know testimony, you have to bring a karbanosha. So, but that only applies by somebody who can talk. Im lo yagid, but if it's somebody who if you don't refuse to say testimony, that is somebody who has to bring a carbon. Prat, that excludes Elam, somebody who cannot speak. She'einu yochel lahagid, who cannot say testimony at all because he can't open his mouth. Such a person is not in the parsha of Shvuas Edis. So now if somebody cannot open his mouth, according to Rav, the best thing to determine if somebody is sane is writing on a piece of paper. So let's say you have a person that can hear but cannot speak. And so why should that person be potter from Shvuas Eidos? Why can't I go over to him and say testimony? He can't open his mouth, but he can write the testimony on a piece of paper. So why isn't he in the parsha of Shvuas Eidos? Because he could write his testimony on a piece of paper. Abai says the truth is testimony is not accepted on a piece of paper. Eidus ka'amrit, shani eidus is different. The Rachman Amma mipiyem v'loy mipik ksavam, that eidus has to be written down, but not written down. It has to be said mouth, out of your mouth, and not out of a piece of paper. So therefore, a piece of paper will not work. So therefore, the Elaim is not in the parsha of Shvuas Eidos. Now Rashi points out, truth is that although we require a person to say testimony with his mouth, but when a person is writing his name on a document, signing on a document, since that's the way it's done on documents, on deeds, where you write the testimony on a piece of paper, you sign your name, there it's enough to write your name. But normally when it's testifying in a court in front of a bezdin, there's no accepting, they can't accept your testimony if it's written on a piece of paper. The judges will not accept that. And therefore, even though he's a sane person, there's exeus akasav that he's not in the parsha of Shvuas Eidos, and that's why this is not a question against Rav. He's a sane person, but he's not in the parsha of Shvuas Eidos, because his testimony written on a piece of paper is not accepted. Meisvei, the Gemara asks another question against Rav. Just like we check somebody who became paralyzed and cannot speak regarding get, here's the point, that just like we check to see if you're saying a person who cannot speak, you check, ask him the yes and no questions, you check him also if he can do business, and for testimony, and for Yerushas, and for inheritance. So the Gemara sees that somebody who is an Elaim can be used as somebody who could say Eidus. And you just said that Eidus cannot be done by somebody who is an Elaim, who cannot speak. Katanimi is Eidus. Amar Rav Yosef bar Ben Yumi, Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes answers, every testimony cannot be done on a piece of paper, except one. The Eidus Isha de Kila Barabanan. The rabbi said, accepted, that even if somebody's an Elaim and cannot speak, if he writes the Eidus that her husband died, we don't want the person to remain in Aguna. They made that leniency that Eidus is accepted, and the woman can get married based on an Eidus that's written down on a piece of paper. Says the Gemara about Katan Yerushas, but the Brisa also says that an Elaim can say testimony that so-and-so inherited money from his father. So that's what the Gemara has thought. Answers the Gemara, Amar Ababo, Birushas Benoy Habachar. He's not saying testimony that somebody else inherited money from his father, but he's saying testimony that he doesn't want his own older son to inherit like the rest of the boys. He's saying we accept what his conditions are in a will, that he doesn't want his older son to get Pishnayim. So that is not an Eidus per se. So therefore an Elaim can do that because he's a sane person. That we learned also that he could say, the Gemara understand that he could be involved in business, and he could say testimony regarding business transactions. But you just told me that Elaim cannot say Eidus against business regarding business transactions. My lav la'alma, to say Eidus regarding other business transactions. No, that doesn't mean business transactions for other people. Lididei, we trust him that if he agrees to sell or buy something, that he's a sane person, and it's not the sale is not null and void. He's a normal person. It's just that when we has to say testimony in court, there's a special kasav that is not accepted. So the Gemara continues to ask against Rav. Rav said that if a cherish that loses his both functions, the hearing and the speaking, he's considered to be insane, but if he proves himself that he can write instructions on a piece of paper, we consider himself sane. So the Gemara asks the question, Cherish, by somebody who's deaf and mute, right? even if he writes things down, we assume, or he jumps around, or he makes motions. We don't believe and accept those as that we're dealing with the same person, even if he writes things down, only with regards to transactions that have to do with movable items. Avoloy legittin, but for gittin, we're going to go very strict, that even if he writes the instructions down, we will not accept it. Because once he's a cherish and loses both the function of his ears and his speech, he's considered to be insane and cannot give a get to his wife. So we see, not like Rav, an open brisa, and says the Gemara Tanoi here. So actually in Machlokes Tanoim, in Tanya we learned in a brisa, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel commented on that brisa. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said that when do you say somebody's insane, and we won't instruct his writing, is somebody who's deaf and mute from the very beginning of their lifetime. Aval, but what Rav is talking about, Aval, and this is what Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Pikeach l'nischaresh, if he was first normal and then he became a deaf mute, then who koised ve'hin koised, he could write and they could sign the get. He could actually write his own get. So Rav Shimon ben Gamliel agrees with Rav, or Rav agrees with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, that if somebody was normal when they got married and then they turned into a cherish, which they lost both functions, if they write their instructions down, that proves that they're still sane, they could give a get to their wife. So Rav was going according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Says the Gemara, v'cherish mikare loy, somebody who's deaf and mute from the very beginning can never give a get to his wife, because we learned what does Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said? Cherish mikare, somebody who gave somebody who was a cherish and he got married, he can never give a get to his wife. We learned in a brisa, just like a person, a cherish, again, cherish is both, just like he married with hinting to his wife, so he can give a divorce with hinting to his wife, so he could give a divorce. So the Gemara says, right, a cherish could give a divorce to his wife, his wife, he could give a divorce, hachinami. But this brisa that says that a woman, a man who's a cherish cannot even give a divorce to his wife, is the nafloi achav cherish b'yavimtoi. That means that his brother fell to him to Yavama, and therefore now he's required to do a marriage d'oraisa. So if he did bia and he was married his Yavama, he can never give her a divorce. So the Gemara says, where did the Yavama fall from? His brother, who was also deaf, married this lady, and then his brother died, and that lady fell for him to Yibam. So his brother had a kedushin derabanan. So when the woman subsequently got Yibam, she was also derabanan. So why can't he divorce her? Since her first marriage was beremiza, so the divorce from the marriage to the brother who did the Yavama who was miyabim this woman should be able to be done with remiza. He could be able to give a divorce with remiza. Ella says the Gemara, one brother was a normal sane brother, so he married a kedushin daraisa, and then he gave her. Then he died, and this woman fell to Yibam to this cherish, who was a cherish mi'ikara. So therefore, since he's now he's miyabim his wife, and it's coming because of the first marriage, which was a kedushin daraisa. So the cherish, after doing Yibam, can never give this woman a divorce. The Ibai said, if you want, I can tell you, maybe it fell from the brother who was also cherish. But we make a gzera that he can never divorce his wife, who the Yavama who fell from the brother who was a cherish. Maybe he'll come to divorce a wife that came from a brother who was a pekeah. So let's say if a person if a cherish marries his own wife, let us say he can never give her a divorce, because maybe if you allow him to give a divorce to his wife, he might give a divorce to his Yavama. And you're telling me all types of Yavamas that fall to this cherish can never be divorced. And says the Gemara, Yavimti Mechalfa. Between Yavam to one Yavama to Yavama, you'll say that just like this Yavama you can give a divorce, you can give a divorce to this Yavama. So therefore we say no matter where this Yavama fell to him, from the Achid Cherish or the Achid Pekeach, she can never divorce her. A person will never exchange his wife for his Yavama. If you tell me that the Yavama he can't get divorced, that he can never give, that he can divorce. If you tell me that his wife he can divorce, he will never say that, oh, just like I could divorce my wife, I can divorce my Yavama. We will not make that mistake. And therefore, we're not geyser. So again, he could divorce his wife, but he can never divorce his Yavama. So the Gemara says, are you telling me that no matter where the Yavama comes from the brother that's a Cherish or the brother that's a Pekeach, brother the Pekeach certainly, but you're telling me that even if it was from a brother that's a Cherish, the man can't divorce his wife? Well, that's not true. We go to Abba Beis. What's now? We learned in the Mishnah, Shnei Ach Cherish, two brothers that are deaf. Okay, so anything that they're going to do, two brothers that are deaf, anything that they're going to do is a kedushin l'Rabbanan. They marry two sisters, no matter what the sanity of the two sisters are, but the two brothers being chershen, they're making kedushin l'Rabbanan. And the opposite case, two sisters that are cherishes are cheroshes, means they're deaf mutes, but they're married to the same. Doesn't matter who their husbands are, even if they're normal. Since the wives are cherishes, the kedushin anyway is the rabbanim. So, but because they're two brothers marrying two sisters, so even if one brother dies, there is no chalitza yibam over here. Of course, because it's a choisishtoy. So harei lepeturas min chalitza yibam. In this case, they're part of chalitza yibam. But here's the chiddush: but if they weren't related, two brothers married two different women, two brothers that are cherish that married two different women. Okay, two brothers that are cherish marrying two different women, so they both married kedushin d'Rabbanan. The Brisa says yichnesu. They can actually do yibam if one of the brothers died, not like what we said. If after he married her, he wants to divorce this woman, he could divorce her. So we see we're not goyrers the yabama that comes from a cherish, or the yabama that comes from a bekeah. Like we learned in the beginning, that the first teretz is the right teretz and not the second teretz. So it's talking about really. It's a yavamta that came only from an achiv pekeach. That's what the Brisa says, that you can never divorce such a woman. Finishing the Gemara to the Mishnah, we learned that Rav, going back to Rav, very important. Rav said that a cherish who has missing both functions, he can never give. He could, if you test him out and he writes it on a piece of paper, and we see that he's sane, then he could give a divorce to his wife. Now, remember, it's not a cherish mikara. He was married normally. He was a pikeach. He was intelligent when he married. He just got a stroke and he lost his hearing and speech. If he writes on a piece of paper and we see that he makes sense, then he could divorce his wife. But Rabbi Yochanan and Rav was aligning himself with the opinion of Rav Shimon Gamliel. So Rabbi Yochanan Chalukan Aleph Kaveiro Shimon Gamliel, the Tanakama, Rabbi Yochanan said that there's other Tanoim that disagree with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So if a person was a pikeach when he got married and loyaleni turned into a cherish, according to Rabbi Yochanan, other Tanoim will hold that he can never divorce his wife ever. Amar Abaye said, we learned that in the Mishnah. Nishtis, if a man became an imbecile, loyalty can never nishtis. I'm sorry, if his wife became an imbecile, loyalty, he's never allowed to give her a divorce. Why? We'll try to explain that in a moment. But take it for the Mishnah says that if a woman becomes nuts, you're not allowed to give her a divorce. This charish but if he became a charish and lost the function of hearing and speech, or he became an imbecile, he can never divorce his wife. So we see that although he was a pekeach when he got married, and then he became a cherish, there's no chance he could ever give a divorce to his wife. Maya Lamas, what does it mean? He can never divorce his wife. Lav, doesn't the Tana mean, even though we see he can write instructions down, he can never divorce his wife. So we see that we do not hold like Rav, that if a pikeach became a cherish, he could actually divorce his wife. So we see a clear Mishnah that disagrees with Rav and Rav Shimon Gamliel. Amar Rav Papa said not true. Rav Papa said that Rabbi Yochanan told us that the Tanoim disagree with Rav, but from that Mishnah, I wouldn't see clearly that this Mishnah is a disagreement against Rav. He loved Ashmin Rabbi Yochanan. If Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't have taught us that there are other Tanoim that disagree with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Hava min Yimina, I would have thought Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Prusha Tana de Kama also. But Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is just trying to explain the Tana Kama of the previous brisa, and there is no argument that a cherish that could write in Toich could give a divorce for his wife. But what does this Mishnah mean? My alamis doesn't mean he can't divorce his wife ever. It means even though we see that he's a functioning person, as long as what the Mishnah means, as long as he didn't prove himself that he's sane, that he was writing instructions down, even though we see that he's somewhat sharp, that doesn't prove that he's sane. That's what it means. But once he proves that he could write things down, that proves enough that maybe the Mishnah would agree that proves enough that he could give a get to his wife. So this Mishnah doesn't necessarily disagree with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. I could say another reason. Look at Rabbi Yitzchak. The Mishnah doesn't mean you can never divorce your wife. Really, you could divorce your wife if you can prove yourself that you're saying b'toich haksav. What does it mean? Lo yotzei lamis. It means as opposed to the first case. Lo yotzei lamis means that with the right, so you can't divorce your wife until you prove that you're sane. But nishtes, really, as opposed to the first case, when a woman turned into an imbecile, there you really technically could give a divorce to your wife if she turned into an imbecile, because a man whose wife is an imbecile, why not? We don't need her das to accept the get. You can divorce your wife against her will. And the whole reason why we said you can't divorce your wife is what the way Rabbi Yitzchak explained. Rabbi Yitzchak, Devar Torah shoyta miskareshes. Mina Torah, you could give a get to a shoyta. Just like any normal lady, you can give a get against her will. Why did the Chacham say you should not give a divorce to your wife if she became a shoyta? Because once she became a shoyta, and now she's going to be a free woman, people are going to be mizana with her. So therefore, we didn't allow a person to divorce his wife if she became a shaita. So that's what oilamis means in this when the Mishnah says that if he became a cherish, he can never divorce his wife. It's trying to say that only in the end of the brisa, which midaraisa he has to prove himself. But in the first part of the brisa, when the shtat is he, this doesn't say oilamis because it's only midrabanan. Because it's only midrabanan, like Rabbi Yitzchak explained, that we don't want a person to divorce his wife when he became an imbecile. But that doesn't disprove that if the person who became an cherish can prove that he can write a get, and can prove that he's saying by writing instructions down, perhaps the Mishnah would agree that in that case he could give a divorce to his wife. So ends Gemara Gittin Daf Ayin.